Hello and welcome to the IOSH Podcast Trailblazer Talks, a new series recorded at the 2024 Health and Safety event in Birmingham. Our next episode features Ruth Wilkinson, Head of Policy at IOSH, and Mike Whiting, a Certification and Compliance Engineer, who discuss the impact of climate change on OSH.
We're here on day 3 at the Health and Safety events, and joining me today in the IOSH podcast is Ruth Wilkinson, Head of Policy at IOSH, and Mike Whiting, Certification and Compliance Engineer at Newmac Ltd. Thank you so much for joining me today in the booth. How are you both?
Very well, thank you, Kelly.
Yes, very well, thanks, Kelly. Just recovering after 45 minutes on the stage there, which was easier than expected.
Good. And hopefully you're nice and warmed up for our chats. So you just have come off the stage at the Keynote Theatre sponsored by IOSH. How did it go? How was the session, Ruth?
It was a really good session, actually. It was packed audience. We had engagement from the audience on Slido, some good questions at the end, ended with top tips. All in all, I really wanted the audience to go away with some insights, understanding, and to take a bit of action internally in their own organisations with climate-related risks. And I think we inspired them, Mike. I don't know about you, but I think we definitely had that engagement and participation.
Yeah, certainly. Listening to the comments from Richard, and Richard and I have spoke a couple of times, and I'm getting understanding of his background and the areas that he works in. But certainly, the aspects of climate change are going to hit us all very, significantly in the near future. And the issue is that at the moment we just go about our daily lives. Some of the facts and figures and interaction with the audience was very worthwhile.
That's really good to hear. So first of all, for our listeners and our viewers, can you tell us a bit about yourself, Ruth?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Kelly, I am the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at IOSH. So my role is about the advocacy, the influence, the impact of good occupational safety and health and wellbeing, and also sort of championing and voicing our members' voice on all these matters of public affairs and policy matters to really get occupational safety and health recognised and implemented through legislation, directives, organisations. So where we can have a voice, we will, to champion that message. And obviously climate is one of those where we really want to start talking about it.
Myself, I'm a chartered engineer with the Institution of Agricultural Engineers, mechanical engineer, and day job is health and safety consultancy. But part of my day job as a consultant is working with people, and health and safety practices, could only be put in place and managed and improved, with team input. So very much it's about engaging with people and saying, well, when we have an issue, what are we going to do to solve it? Because quite often, those collaborations and thought processes, bring about lots of new ideas and long-term improvements to health.
So we're here today to talk about the growth of climate-related risk. We're all increasingly aware of climate change, but what does it mean for workers, and what kind of new hazards are they likely to face, Ruth?
And I suppose before I come back to that question exactly, one of the starting commentary from me a moment ago on the session was sort of saying that through IOSH we have been talking about sustainability and through our Catch the Wave agenda. And when we talk about sustainability, we'll, as part of Activate 2028, we're really looking at actually what does that mean? So you need sustainable economies, you need sustainable communities, you need sustainable work, but actually there is a intersection where the environment and that climate does cross with the world of work. So in all likelihood, we know that the future will be characterised by increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and increased occurrence and intensity of extreme weather events. So when we come back to that question, we know that it will present significant risk to human health in the form of injuries, communicable and non-communicable diseases. And I did share as part of the session the latest ILO report on climate change, and there's some really startling facts and figures of billions of workers exposed, thousands of workers suffering fatal consequences in the workplace due to these high heat exposures, plus other hazards. So when we're talking about climate and the hazards you said, Kelly, about what they're facing, we are talking about hazards like heat, air pollution, those extreme weather events, exposure to UV, exposure obviously to the sun, so who's working outdoors, vector-borne diseases and agrochemicals. And there's another key point I mentioned at the session was about actually, you'll probably be sitting there listening to this thinking, actually, some of these hazards aren't new. You're doing things to mitigate, to prevent them already. But it is the occurrence of them is going to be increasing. So we do need to make sure we're taking that action. So it's not just heat, it's a whole mixture of hazards and risks.
Absolutely. And what kinds of climate-related changes have you seen during your career, Mike?
Well, the world of agriculture and the whole area of forestry and certainly vegetable growing geared towards food production, and everybody's looking for cheaper food. But the issues are that when climate starts to affect things, either through failed harvests, because of the warm weather, or land that you can't get on at all because it's wet, then that increases or decreases the time window that machinery can work, etc. It puts pressure on people, so people start to rush, and things aren't as controlled as they should be. And the other factor is that we're all motivated by work, etc. And we all, when we've had a busy day and we've all been rushed off our feet, and we look back and we say, well, we've done quite well and everything else, and we sit down and have a bit of refreshment. But when that type of situation is happening and we're working harder and we're exposed to other, increased temperatures, we might not be aware of it, and we might not be aware of what it's doing to our body. And we've seen the time lag effect of things like in the construction industry, so silica dust, which is now a big factor. So what we need to avoid is this time lag effect of, in 10 years' time, suddenly realising that climate change affects people's health, because it's affecting them obviously now.
So digging deeper into those risks, obviously being from an agricultural background, that's an industry affected by climate change day to day. What kinds of risks are you seeing, and how is the industry seeking to mitigate those risks?
Well, I suppose mitigating those risks is the industry's got to become more efficient. So one of the things that we are seeing, and as you can appreciate, we have got less migrant workers here now, and we are seeing an exponential growth in the use of automated machinery for harvesting. So examples would be the harvesting of like strawberries in the large polytunnels, etc. But what comes with that is the challenges with technology, because obviously a human can at the moment harvest strawberries a lot faster than a robot, but that will soon change. So actually, there's the aspect then of saying, well, okay, then we've got robots working. But there might be another challenge that actually you might have a lot of people doing a lot more lone working. So because you could have some people working in a pack house looking after 10 robots, 20 robots, and then being literally on their own. So it's the knock-on effects, and then saying, well, how do we manage those areas there? And the other thing is that whatever happens, livestock needs to be livestock will need to be managed. That means people will need to work outside, and people will need to work with closely with these things. So how do we then make people aware of the fact of saying, well, actually you've been out in the sun too long, we need to you need to come in and get some rest, or you need to get some hydration. So certainly, this area of control and management will be a key factor, and I think education and training. I think at the moment, is it California have put something in place with regards to the impact of working temperatures and everything, we're obviously aware that the places in the US are going to experience some very hot temperatures. So we'll have to look and learn from other countries as well.
And it's about moving with the times as well, isn't it? So you've mentioned a couple of those there, Mike. Ruth, are there some lesser known effects of climate change that might escape consideration in the first place?
And I think this is one of the areas when we were talking at the session a moment ago that I've already mentioned, there's the heat, there's the UV, but actually there can also be impacts on psychosocial factors. There could be stress, there can be fatigue, and it can obviously also result in reduced productivity. So there are these knock-on effects. If we're changing the way we're doing our operations, changing how we're working times and patterns, obviously it can all impact our health in different ways. And it's just really important that we do consider those risks holistically. And also, Kelly, we've talked a bit about outdoor workers. We also need to acknowledge that there are risks to those who are working indoors as well. So if you think of people working in factories, they're also going to be at risk of those higher heats inside those workplaces, and also air pollution that could be coming into those work environments that they're working within. So I think we do need to look at and consider all those groups, all those workers, and part of the risk is part of our risk assessment process, is looking at those vulnerable groups of workers. And Mike, you mentioned a moment ago sort of migrant workers. I think when we think internationally in our operations, our global supply chains, we do need to look at those who might be more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, and they might need extra protective measures. So there might be migrant workers, there'll be some workers who are in the informal economy, and there might be workers who are working sort of day labour, doing particular pieces of work for us, who just might be more vulnerable for lots of different reasons. So we do need to consider that entire value chain, that process.
Absolutely. So what's IOSH's policy on climate change?
Well, we have got an IOSH policy position out there, and obviously it highlights that this is a real subject matter that we do need to take control of and take action on. And we're acknowledging that actually climate-related issues and risks, it can threaten business operations, supply chains, workers, communities, wider society, which will require sound occupational health and safety to support the achievement and the direction of socially and environmental responsible business. So with all that in mind, because we are the chartered body for our occupational safety and health professionals, we do see that the OSH professionals will be increasingly called on to help public policymakers and organisations to tackle this complex work-related health challenge as a consequence of climate change, environmental degradation, air pollution and extreme weather. They will help to ensure climate change adaptation strategies, better anticipation, evaluation and control strategies of occupational hazards. So we're really seeing that there is a role for OSH professionals. But again, I do want to reiterate that it is a role that they're undertaking at the moment. So it will be through good risk assessments, making, those vulnerable workers I've just mentioned. So we do that as part of good risk assessment anyway. We look for prevention and mitigation strategies. So this is part of that. Let's look for these strategies. Let's make sure we look at prevention and control strategies that are relevant to the risk. So we really do see there's a role for the OSH professionals to play, as well as businesses and government. And our new IOSH report, which looks at the changing world of work, does recognise that climate is playing a part. And, what happens if we don't make sure that transition is a just transition, that it's fair and it is equitable? We do need to consider the people, the impact on safety, the impact on health, and we've all got key actors and a role to play in that. So our policy, we've got a position at the moment, Kelly, and we'll continue to talk about this topic across this year and across our Activate 2028 strategy, because it's integral to that social sustainability agenda. Although it's environment, this is a bit about the workers. We're talking about the hazards and the risks, and this is the real reality of it at this moment in time.
And so, Mike, how do you think OSH professionals can help ensure compliance amongst the workforce with new measures to safeguard them against climate-related risk? So sort of looking towards more the solution.
I think the first thing is as Ruth's comments, is getting an understanding. And as a mechanical engineer, the principles is that you have to understand the subject and say, well, we're always trying to find a robust solution. The first thing of working at height is don't work at height. So we're saying, well, okay, then how do we manage that accordingly? It's that monitoring and saying, well, are we going to have to adapt businesses to be able to adjust quicker? Because we've talked about the heat, but obviously at the same time, when you talk about heavy rainfall and the effects of rainfall on things like subsidence and landslip, and there will be the massive implications on all the infrastructure, such as railways and all those areas that, when we get these events happening. So I think certainly it's first of all is just getting an understanding. Make sure you include it in the mix, and I know quite often, as Ruth said, when people are doing risk assessments, it's what have we missed? Well, what we need to make sure is that climate change isn't the thing that's missed, and because the effect on health isn't always noted today, it's not noted tomorrow or next week, but it could be noted next year or the year after.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I've noticed that as a bit of a theme, certainly with the sessions and the people that I've spoken to here in the podcast booth, talking about don't sort of jump on the bandwagon because it's what everyone's talking about and it's trendy. Understand it first. And that seems to be a key theme. Just make sure, with AI as well, make sure you understand the basics first and why you need this before you sort of run before you can walk and implement it, because that's what the board want, for example. So, really interesting to hear that, Mike. So, Ruth, what do you believe OSH professionals need to consider both for the present and looking towards the future?
Yeah, and I mean, it's that's a good question, Kelly. And I think, excuse me for reading from my notes here a moment, but because we have had the new IOSH report come out, there are some clear calls to action to the OSH professionals, as well as to governments and as well as to businesses and to IOSH. For the OSH professionals, as I say, there is a role that we can play. So we can argue for the support and the implementation of control strategies that regard climate change related risks. So again, this is just simply within our workplace, doing what we do. When we're identifying hazards, we're assessing the risks and we're putting in place control strategies. When we're looking at those hazards and we talk about doing holistic risk assessments, it really is looking across the periphery, across the board of all those risks. So when we consider psychosocial risk factors, we're also considering those climate-related ones. So if you've got outdoor workers, are they exposed to the heat? Are they exposed to the sun, the UV? What have you got in place? But also, and Mike, you touched on this in the session, that we're talking about agrochemicals here, but if you're using pesticides or other types of chemicals, when are you using it? What are the risks and who's exposed? So it's just playing our part that within that process, we are looking at the strategies, getting the right preventative strategies in place, the right control strategies. But also, we've talked about technology. And again, Mike, you touched a bit on this, that technology is going to be coming in to operations and processes, and it might support and improve occupational safety and health, but it might also provide us challenges or opportunities to improve and consequences as well. Whatever the new technology is, we do need to make sure that, again, operations are changing, new technology. Let's design in safety, follow those principles. Let's design it in. Let's design in health as part of that. When we're coming up at that design stage, the manufacturing stage, the consultation stage, let's think about the safety and health implications. Let's take human-centric approaches and let's plan and prepare for this. So we're in good time. We know what's happening. And just to really champion socially sustainable work in all the practices that we do. And I know I'm using all these terms, but actually it's just do the job that we've always been doing, but let's just be prepared, let's consider, and let's use the resources that are available to us. And look at the new IOSH report, look at the new ILO report, look on your IOSH blueprint, for the members, look at the occupational health information on there, look at our No Time to Lose campaign about sun protection. Refamiliarise yourself if you haven't looked for some time now, and just adopt that in the practices. So it's doing what we know now, Kelly, but part of that is preparing for the future. So we know the landscape's changing, we know the world is getting hotter, we're already seeing wildfires, people are having to respond differently, we're changing operations. I think it's just making sure that through our risk assessment review processes, we are considering that. We are talking to the workers on the front line. All the stuff we do already, but let's have a bit of a focus on climate as well.
That's some really good guidance for our listeners there. And Mike, have you got anything to add to that in terms of agriculture?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the big factors is that the average age of the farmer probably is 58 now or something in that area. We've got a population, aging population. Farmers want to farm forever, and they're renowned sometimes for liking to work extremely hard, should we say, and very much committed to what they do. So it's just taking that moment to just say to ourselves, well, actually, can we plan things better, which means that actually we get the job done more efficiently. We've seen the effect of, as I say, heavy rainfall. Not only we talked about subsidence, but it slips and trips, falls from height. Back to the basics. Those type of areas. So it's really just in the planning and preparation, etc. And talking about the subject. So the more it's talked about, the more that the figures are mentioned and aired and those type of things, it just starts to get people engaged with it more.
Well, that's a really, really great note to end it on. Thank you both so much for joining me today in the IOSH podcast. It was great to meet you both. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Join us next week for more Trailblazer Talks from the IOSH podcasts.